The Pentagon, meantime, denying claims that the U.S. gave intel to Ukraine that helped locate and blow up a massive Russian warship in the Black Sea last month. The Biden administration has been careful not to get American forces involved in the war on the ground.
President Biden announcing yet another weapons package for Ukraine, reported to be about $100 million. That's on top of the billions already sent, equaling more than Ukraine's entire defense budget. The U.S. supplying guns, missiles, ammunition, training, and providing intelligence. Howitzers, javelins, helicopters. The U.S. continuing the flow of weapons into Ukraine in its more than 2-month-long battle against Russia's invasion. The U.S. sharing intelligence with Ukraine, leading to the killings of Russian generals and taking down the flagship of Russia's Black Sea fleet, the Moskva, more than 70 days into the war. The U.S. denying it gave specific intelligence or knew of the operation to take out the Moskva. But officials say they are helping short of sending U.S. troops or jets. The Pentagon adding this is still a war between Russia and Ukraine, not the U.S. versus Russia.
Mick, I want to go to you on this report. That U.S. officials are telling reporters on background that America provided intelligence to Ukrainians that allowed them to sink that ship, the Moskva, one of the biggest successes of the war for Ukraine. So 2 questions. How big, how significant is that? What does it tell you about the kind of intelligence? And what does it tell you that it's being disclosed, that the United States is willing to have Russia know that we helped headhunt the flagship of their Black Sea fleet?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the weekly report. Last week, an extraordinary article appeared in, of all places, NBC News, reporting that U.S. intelligence community is knowingly feeding information it does not believe accurate to the U.S. mainstream media for the American audience to consume. In other words, the article reports that the U.S. deep state admits to being actively engaged in lying to the American people in the hopes that it can manipulate public opinion. Readers will recall the shocking headlines that Russia was prepared to use chemical weapons in Ukraine, that China would be providing military equipment to Russia, that Russian President Putin was being fed misinformation by his advisors, and more. All of these were churned out by the CIA to be repeated in the American media, even though they were known to be false.
So if you listen to the corporate media, you won't know what's actually happening in Ukraine or why there's a war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has been provoked by NATO by threatening to bring Ukraine into NATO. And that was the one thing everyone knew would provoke an attack by Russia. Plus, there's an oil pipeline involved. It's called Nord Stream 2, going right from Russia to Germany. So 40% of the energy in Europe comes from Russia. And the United States wants in on that market. So that's what this is all about. The Pope says NATO started a war in Ukraine by barking at Putin's door. This is the Pope. I feel that before going to Kiev, I must go to Moscow, he told Corriere della Sera in an interview that ran Tuesday. But the meeting would not exactly be to condemn Putin, based on what he told the paper. He said that the real scandal of Putin's war is NATO barking at Russia's door, which he said caused the Kremlin to react badly and unleash the conflict. There's the Pope saying the real scandal is not Putin, but NATO. Francis repeated comments he has made in general audiences and in other interviews that the war is nothing more than a giant opportunity for a trade in arms, and that it is still ongoing because of the constant shuttling of weapons to Ukraine. He has spoken twice by phone to Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, but mostly to urge him to not fight back. He also went to the Russian embassy to the Holy See days after the invasion began to register his concerns about what was happening. I don't know how to answer. I'm too far away. The question of whether it is right to supply the Ukrainians, he told the paper. The clear thing is that weapons are being tested there. The Russians now know that tanks are of little use and are thinking of other things. This is why wars are waged, to test the weapons we have produced. Few people are fighting this trade, but more should be done. Pope Francis veered towards conspiracy theory. Pope Francis veered toward conspiracy theory as he blamed the international community for instigating the war. You cannot think that a free state can make war on another free state, he said. In Ukraine, it seems that it was the others who created the conflict. I am pessimistic, but we must do everything possible to stop the war. The Pope then said that in a state visit to Rome by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, he was told the Russians have a plan and that everything will end on May 9th. Without giving any further explanation, May 9th is the day Russia celebrates its liberation and the end of World War II. Even the pontiff concedes that a meeting in Moscow is a long shot. I fear that Putin cannot and does not want to have this meeting at this time, he said, but how can you not stop so much brutality? Here is Mick Wallace says, now that's really dangerous of the Pope to dare speak truth to power. Surely it must be time to sanction the Vatican. How will the political and media class of Europe cope with the idea that the NATO war machine might not be a force for good after all?
Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. These are the words of Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the 34th President of the United States of America. Eisenhower also said this in 1953.
The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete pavement. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people.
Later in his presidency, Eisenhower would issue a dire warning, a warning about the dangers of the military-industrial complex. He described it as a threat to democracy. He raised concerns about the costs of an arms race with the Soviet Union, how it would take away resources from other developmental projects, like building schools and hospitals. The last 2 months have been described as the darkest hours in Europe since World War II. Over 2 months have passed. Who is winning this war? The military-industrial complex. The global arms bazaar is controlled by a handful of big players. From 2016 to 2020, the United States, Russia, France, China, the United Kingdom and Germany exported 80% of the world's weapons. Barring China, every country on this list is directly involved in the Ukraine conflict. Russia is the aggressor. The US, the UK, France and Germany are all arming Ukraine. And by the way, out of these 6 countries, 5 are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So much for their commitment to international peace and security. But there's one country that maintains a towering presence in the global arms bazaar, and that's the United States of America. It accounts for 37% of the global exports. And this makes the US the biggest exporter of major weapons. Why does the US dominate this market? Because it is home to the top 5 manufacturers in the world: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and General Dynamics. All 5 are American companies. Together, they sold more than $160 billion worth of weapons in 2019. As they say, war is good for business. So when Russia's war in Ukraine began, the stock prices of American defense companies soared. Shares of Raytheon shot up by 8%, General Dynamics 12%, Lockheed Martin 18%, and Northrop Grumman a whopping 22%. Weapons of many of these companies are now in the battlefields of Ukraine. I'm talking about lethal equipment like Switchblade drones, armored and tactical vehicles, howitzers, javelin missiles, and thousands of rifles, pistols, machine guns, and shotguns. Since the war began, America has committed over $3 billion in weapons in Ukraine, but almost all of it came from existing American government stockpiles. Recently, we even saw some correction in stock prices of defense companies, but make no mistake, weapons contractors will emerge as the big winners of this war, of course, with some help from the US government. In April, there was a classified meeting at the Pentagon. The US Defense Department called their largest defense contractors. 8 CEOs attended this meeting. Also present was the US Deputy Secretary of Defense. What was on the agenda? 3 objectives were listed: delivering critical supplies to Ukraine, enhancing American preparedness, and supporting allies and partners. Basically, this was the US government telling these contractors, we'll need more weapons. The American stockpile is not unlimited after all. It will have to be replenished. And American lawmakers plan to pour big money into this, feed the military-industrial complex that can churn out more weapons. Who wants the war to end? 2 programs are expected to finance this procurement. One is the Pentagon's Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. The other is the US State Department's Foreign Military Financing Program. They have budgets that run into billions of dollars. Where do you think all that money will go? Into the pockets of defense contractors, American defense contractors. And they're absolutely unapologetic about this. Consider what the CEO of Raytheon recently said. This is Greg Hayes in January this year, well before the war in Ukraine began. We are seeing, I would say, opportunities for international sales. The tensions in Eastern Europe, the tensions in the South China Sea, all of those things are putting pressure on some of the defense spending over there. So I fully expect we are going to see some benefit from it. We are defending democracy, they say, and making some money while we are at it. What do you make of these claims? Are American weapons transfers really about defending democracy? Who is buying American weapons? Let's look at some of the deals that were closed by the Biden administration. Barely weeks after Joe Biden's inauguration as president, the United States approved a sale of surface-to-air missiles to Egypt. In the following months, America sold missiles to Chile, F-16 aircraft and missiles to the Philippines, Javelins to Thailand, air-to-air missiles to Saudi Arabia. None of these countries have shining human rights records. But the US is selling billions of dollars worth of weapons to all of them. And American defense contractors are profiting from all these deals. The worst fears of President Eisenhower are being realized. The military-industrial complex is enriching itself from the Ukraine war. Does Ukraine really need all of these weapons that are being poured into the country? What about America arming autocrats? The exit from Afghanistan was supposed to halt the American war machine. It has just shifted gears and turned towards Ukraine because for defense companies to make money, the war must go on.
Russia has violated the national integrity of Ukraine.
The essence of the aggressive nationalistic character of the regime that seized power in Kiev hasn't changed.
By sending peacekeeping troops to rebel-held areas in Donetsk and Luhansk, NATO is outraged. Because when they sent troops to rebel-held areas in Libya, who ended up toppling Gaddafi, leading to the devastating destabilization of the entire region, leading to the rise of ISIS, leading to numerous mass casualty terror attacks throughout Europe, leading to the international migrant crisis, leading to soaring violent crime and sexual assaults throughout Europe, well that was different. It's okay when we do it. The recognition of the 2 separatist territories in Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law. Alexa, what's Kosovo? No, that was different. Save me the sanctimonious crap.